On October 30th, 1961, the usually frigid and desolate landscape of Severny Island in northern Russia was illuminated by a brilliant flash and scorched by a fireball nearly the size of Mount Everest. It was said to have been visible as far away as Norway and Greenland, and the shockwaves emanating from all sides of this miniature sun traversed the Earth 3 times. A hellish cloud of toxic radioactive substances rose 42 miles into the atmosphere. The Tsar Bomba was the pinnacle of nuclear explosive yield, a Soviet creation intended to counter the superior accuracy of American ICBMs with its sheer destructive capabilities. The nuclear arms race of the prior 15 years had created a surplus of such weapons that had the potential to erase most of human civilization as if it had never existed. We even gave a name to the terrifying and likely outcome of these weapons being used en masse: mutually assured destruction, a simple yet preposterous principle. Considering all the sobering problems and possibilities the mere existence of these weapons poses, the question we are left with is, for what purpose? In his seminal philosophical work, The Myth of Sisyphus, French philosopher Albert Camus writes, "Man stands face to face with the irrational. He feels within him his longing for happiness and for reason. The absurd is born of this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world." These words were written as France fell under German control in the early stages of World War II, a tumultuous and uncertain period, a time when the irrational seemed to have become the norm. In a sense, these words perfectly encapsulate the existential dilemma Camus wanted his readers to ponder. We, as hyperconscious beings, have an innate desire to find order and reason in what we experience around us, and yet, we find ourselves unable to reconcile this desire with reality. The absurd appears cold, indifferent, and chaotic. It rose from the desert like a second sun, a searing, brilliant, expanding ball of fire, and it struck terror into everyone who saw it. In the first millisecond, it resembled something horrifyingly alien, a giant, fleshy, brain-like shape with shooting points of fire, and the sky split before it. In that same millisecond, the very instant of its birth, the temperature at its core was 60 million degrees centigrade. The moment of detonation at the Trinity test site in July 1945 was the marking moment from one era of human civilization into the next. In an instant, man had harnessed the power of the most fundamental of elements and created a weapon that would completely upend the fabric of international relations. Just a single one of these weapons could turn vibrant cities into a smoldering, radioactive ruin, as was seen at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It did not take long for the nuclear age to reach cataclysmic levels of potentiality. The first successful Soviet test of an atomic weapon in 1949 thrusted the ongoing Cold War into an existential front. The two most powerful nations in the world walked the razor-thin line of maintaining international order while testing atomic weapons of increasingly ludicrous yields in preparation for their potential use. Perhaps there was some plausibility at first that these weapons could be used in a limited capacity during wartime without reaching apocalyptic levels. Of course, this was nullified by the onset of thermonuclear weapons testing in 1952. Through the complex process of nuclear fusion, these second-generation warheads were many hundreds times more powerful than the weapons used against Japan. Now, there was the very real possibility that any escalation could end in the extinction of mankind, whether through direct nuclear attacks or the radioactive holocaust that would follow. The absurd had manifested itself in an appalling way, and there was no going back. In his 1951 book, The Rebel, Camus writes, "Whatever we may do, excess will always keep its place in the heart of man, in the place where solitude is found. We all carry within us our places of exile, our crimes, and our ravages. But our task is not to unleash them on the world. It is to fight them, in ourselves and in others." The absurd permeates through all aspects of reality, according to Camus. It is the unrelenting irrationality that completely opposes our will to understand and make sense of life. It is no better observed in its physical form than in the thousands of nuclear warheads all over the globe. At an instant, everything that humankind has worked hundreds of thousands of years towards could be eradicated. The wealth of knowledge and the progress of civilization that had been so painfully worked for to this point would be wiped out, begging the question of why they were even worth attaining. While Camus does make very clear his idea that the absurd is by its nature impossible for man to make rational sense of, his solution is not one of nihilistic trepidation. To be sure, there is expected to be distress when one realizes the true incapacity of his reasoning. But this is precisely how we are to overcome this pessimistic epiphany. As Camus would put it, we are to rebel against the absurd and create a purpose for ourselves in spite of it. When we consider the dreadful presence of atomic weapons, there is a distinct anxiety that arises. The anxiety that, at any moment of escalation, all we have known and will come to know ceases to mean anything at all. Camus believed that this is to be our expected reaction when confronting the irrational in any situation, and as such there are a multitude of possible responses. There may be an urge to give in to despair, to spend our lives in constant angst about what may happen. After all, if there truly is no meaning behind the preposterous nature of reality, that may seem to be the only reasonable reaction. But what if there is an alternative approach? Camus proposes exactly that by assuring his readers that, if one allows themselves, there is freedom to be found in the absurd. We can assert our individuality in spite of the cold indifference of a world filled with nuclear armaments. This is what he considers an act of rebellion, a permanent revolt against the existential uncertainty we face. In truth, we have done precisely that since the initial explosion at Trinity in 1945. In the decades since the opening of the atomic era, our species has fostered a global society that has taken incredible strides in areas such as technology, equality, and social justice. The Cold War, even with its proxy wars and geopolitical tensions, passed without nuclear annihilation. There is a mostly collective desire to ensure the advancement of the human race into the future, and this is all being done in spite of our acknowledgement of the continued atomic threat. We are, in fact, rebelling simply by continuing on the path of progress. It is important, however, to be ever mindful of the circumstances we could potentially face should we confront the absurd. Camus uses the example of the Greek king Sisyphus, doomed to roll a boulder up a mountain day after day, only to watch his progress evaporate as the stone plunges back down again each time. He has accepted his absurd condition, and continues to do his duty despite knowing its futility. Likewise, we roll upwards the boulder of progress and civilization, many times watching it stumble back downwards to be pushed up again. What sets our condition apart from the accursed king, however, is our potential to obliterate our boulder, negating the possibility of it ever being rolled upwards again.